We turn now to CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett and CBS News election law contributor David Becker, who have a new book out on the state of American democracy. It's called The Big Truth: Upholding Democracy in the Age of the Big Lie. Congratulations to you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, Major, I want to start with you because in those, just literally the first page of the book, you use the phrase American Civil War. You go on to write that in the upcoming election in November and in 2024, trust itself is going to be tested. Democracy no longer suffers from a lack of participatory energy. It suffers from a lack of respect, allegiance, knowledge, humanity, and most of all, trust. How dangerous is the moment that we are in?
It feels more dangerous, Margaret, than any I've encountered in covering politics at the national level since 1990. Stating what clearly happened in 2020, it wasn't a fraudulent election, no crime was committed. That doesn't mean you have to be happy with the result, but one of the burdens of democracy is when you're unhappy with the result, your obligation is to win the next election, not slander baselessly the election you fairly lost. And we have a component of American politics now that wants to slander an election that was fairly lost because they're unhappy. And that unhappiness does not entitle you to drag down American democracy, because if, Margaret, we enter a phase in American life where either political party refuses to accept a fair and verified election simply because it lost, then we will dismantle democracy bit by bit before our very eyes.
One of our colleagues here, Nicole Skenga, interviewed Kim Wyman. She is the senior election security lead at part of Homeland Security. She spent 30 years working in elections out in the state of Washington. And in this interview, she clearly is feeling that this threat is hitting home. Take a listen.
Some of the threats are real, you know, we're going to hang you, I hope somebody puts a bullet in your head, that kind of thing. So it's unnerving. It's unnerving.
It's a Homeland Security official being moved to tears by what she is talking about. I mean, it's extremely powerful to me to hear that. How common is that right now?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very common. She, like so many of her colleagues, and she's seeing this because she's working with them, are facing an onslaught of threats and harassment and abuse in the aftermath of the 2020 election that is completely divorced from the reality of their success. The election professionals all over the country, red states, blue states, Republicans, Democrats, somehow managed the highest turnout we have ever seen in American history in the middle of a global pandemic. And the ultimate results of this election were withstood scrutiny from 60 courts around the country. It was remarkable.
What's the scenario they fear this November?
They embrace aggressive transparency. They want everyone to see everything that they're doing. And yet, despite the facts, despite that transparency, all that seems to matter is that some people believe that it is impossible for their candidate to lose. And if we get so divorced from that reality, we get so divorced from our democratic principles that, as Major said, we start being unwilling to accept the possibility of defeat, what might be possible then? And we've already seen this. This isn't hypothetical. We've seen this on January 6th, and we could see in the future dozens of little January 6th, not focused on Washington on one particular date, but focused in many different places on many different dates.
And Major, you talk about the political benefits to calling 2020 into election, particularly for the former president. According to CBS numbers, in battleground states, over 60% of Republican candidates on the ballot are election deniers. Two of the best known, perhaps, Kari Lake out in Arizona and Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania. Is this, indulging this, simply the cost of winning an endorsement from the former president, who is a political powerhouse? Or do they believe it?
It's certainly the former. Getting President Trump's endorsement runs through a sieve that requires you to say the 2020 election was stolen. And if you say it the loudest of any of the Republicans also vying for that endorsement in any particular state, you're most likely to get that endorsement. But Kari Lake's an interesting example of this phenomenon. She said before the primary was decided that fraud was afoot. She said while votes were being counted, fraud was afoot. She was trailing, and then she came out ahead, late in the process, and said it was then, therefore, legitimate. I would only say that is not a veil of hypocrisy. That is the very definition of hypocrisy. The exact process you assailed is the one that made you the GOP nominee. therefore it's legitimate only because you become the nominee? That doesn't add up.
David, we've talked in the past about Democrats who have questioned the outcome of elections. Republicans often point to that when this is discussed. How concerned are you now that this kind of language is just becoming not normalized, but made into just a political tool?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that because, factually speaking, right now, we have the most professional, accurate, transparent, secure election system we've ever had, and it keeps getting better every election cycle. But and
it's interesting you say that because, as you know, there has been this movement to change voting rights and to protect them. So it is becoming discussed as if there is something perhaps not working right.
It's really troubling in the sense that while it's not moral equivalence here, it's not coming equally from both sides of the political spectrum. It is definitely coming overwhelmingly from the extreme right now. There certainly are aspects of it coming from across the political spectrum. But we could get to a point that if this is seen as politics as usual, that this is just part of the game, we're going to be at a very, very dangerous point for our democracy. If the losing side cannot accept defeat, especially in a country that's divided 50-50.
The great fear I have, Margaret, is politics is a lot like the NFL. It's a copycat league. Whatever succeeds, you replicate. On the right, in the Trump world now, the fastest way to social media fame and fundraising is to deny the 2020 election. You don't think Democrats aren't watching that and may be tempted by the same social media and fundraising lure that has? They will be. That's why we have to stop it, back away from it, and say, not here, not this place. This part of our civic life is sacred.
Thank you both for sharing the book with us and your insights.